Demon Slayer is one of the best animes ever made, of all time. There's no denying it. Especially if you're 10 years old and have never watched another anime in your life. But other than that, the anime is truly a huge success all over the world. It was one of the few animes to make almost $500 million with its film alone, which is a hard thing even for Marvel movies nowadays. And in the US, it would be no different. Especially because of the huge number of children who don't get proper attention from their parents and therefore end up watching this sort of crap. In fact, this is exactly how I got addicted to Boku no Hero. Nah, just kidding. I don't do drugs. And today, after spending 5 years in college studying psychology to discover that my true dream was actually to be a bum who only makes videos on the internet, I'm here to tell you about the hidden psychology behind Demon Slayer. But first, let's do a recap. Demon Slayer begins with the boy Tanjiro with his beautiful family until everyone dies, except his sister, who suffers from borderline personality disorder and ends up needing to be stopped with a stick in her mouth. Literally an anime adaptation of Sigmund Freud's book, Studies on Hysteria. After his sister calms down, Tanjiro seeks help from a guy who ends up making Tanjiro his personal maid. It's literally Karate Kid anime version. Then Tanjiro breaks a rock in half with his Jedi training to show how much determination of the mind is capable of overcoming any physical obstacle. A good reference to the philosophy of the samurai that shows how much the determination of your thoughts, the prior determination of your mind and what you really want in life is capable of cutting through even the hardest of the obstacles. If you want another book recommendation, there is this book Hagakure by Yamamoto Tsunetomo or The Legend of the Five Rings by Musashi Miyamoto, which are classics of Japanese literature. But then Tanjiro ends up finding the boogeyman who was eating children on the forest. He kills him and then he becomes a ninja, finds Orochimaru dressed as Michael Jackson, promises to kill him, and then finds Galadriel, but her helper wants to kill Tanjiro now. Then Tanjiro kills 2 more demons and sets off to his ninja adventure, where he meets more friends and starts winning battles with the power of friendship. But then villains keep appearing and doing evil things, but oh no, the villains have set past, and that's why you should feel sorry for them now. Then you feel sad, then Rengoku dies, Nezuko dies, Kagaya blows himself, and half of the Hashira also go down the drain. And that's it. That's the best summary that I could make and that you will get from Demon Slayer. Now, one of the most interesting things about this anime, which are many as you can see, is the person who wrote this anime, or more specifically, the way she, the author, ended up deciding to write it. Because Demon Slayer uses 2 premises to write both his work and the characters. First one is the duality of the characters, where everything seems pretty black and white. There are villains and there are heroes. There are good guys and there are bad guys. If you go to a personality database and end up looking at the personality type of the author, you will see that many people will say that she is an INFP. And if you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. What matters is normally that authors and directors who have this type of personality really like to create this dynamic of good and evil. For example, Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. Almost all of his films end up having almost this very defined situation of who is good and who is evil, and then that good always ends up prevailing no matter what happens. There is J.R.R. Tolkien, who literally bases the entire Lord of the Rings on this premise. Despite all the depth of the work, if you were to summarize it, it would be exactly like this. There are heroes and there are villains, and good always prevails. George Lucas based the Star Wars story only in the premise of the Jedis and the Siths. And even though some Jedis can become corrupt, they always end up being the good guys in the end. Even Masashi Kishimoto, creator of Naruto, has somewhat a similar personality too. And the point is not to say that Demon Slayer has hero and villains, because almost every story you will watch will have something similar to that. The point here is to say how constraining this division between good and evil in the series can be. The villains are always evil, and the heroes are always good. And this well-defined dynamic ends up being what perhaps ends up making people like the anime a lot? Who knows? But there is a catch, because in the same way the author tends to be type with this personality type, she also tends to have a clash with another personality type, which is INFJ. While INFPs care more about the values of the right and wrong, the good and evil, INFJs, even though they like this too, they end up having an additional factor. Because INFJs will always work with what is called symbolism. Joseph Campbell, author of The Hero's Journey, who based his book on Carl Jung's works, a great scholar of mystical, mythological, and religious symbols, are both of them, in fact, people of this personality type. These are people and authors in this case who are always working with the meaning behind what they want to present. What is the meaning of the images, the settings, the speeches, and of course, the characters. Another example of this is the author of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, who I intended to make a video about later. She soaks the manga and the anime with symbols of transmutation, metaphors, phrases, and concepts, all with a meaning that most of the time, not even if you watch the anime 3 times, you will understand. The same goes for the author of Monster, Naoki Urasawa, who is revered as precisely because of the metaphorical things he put in his work, in which each character and each gesture they make perhaps symbolizes and represents something that is not just what is seen in that specific scene. Akira Kurosawa, Tarkovsky, Lars von Trier, and Stanley Kubrick, more or less, are also film directors who do exactly this very well. And here in Demon Slayer, the same thing happens, because even though there is this priority of good versus evil, the author manages to take this to an extra step of giving a symbolism to each character, which explains this clash of knowing whether her personality is INFP or INFJ. And here's why. Each character in Demon Slayer could represent, in addition to their motivation of good or evil, a will or a value. In this case, a positive value if they are a hero, or a negative one if they are a villain. For example, in addition to having this main theme of perseverance, you also have the main protagonist representing precisely this, the archetype of the anime protagonist, which is that guy who never gives up, who no matter how many times they put him down, he will keep moving forward, he will resist, he will persist. In other words, Tanjiro is a positive value that represents this perseverance and persistence, no matter the challenges. Although he has some scenes of compassion here and there, it is clear that this perseverance is his greatest attribute. For Nezuko, you ironically have this aspect of purity, because although she is young, beautiful, and even a baby or a child in some scenes, she also is infected by a demon virus that ends up transforming her into an adult, powerful and well-endowed woman. Now remember, this was written by a woman as well, so she knows what she's doing here, which could also be a representation of femininity or puberty, which is quite common in this type of character. But this aspect of purity is also represented by the mission that Tanjiro has with her, which is to find a cure, something that will really purify her to the point that she can even go out to the sun without being burned. But anyway, Rengoku, who is one of my favorite characters and many people's too, is clearly a representation of the inspiration and motivation that people have. While Tanjiro persists despite everything, Rengoku is much more than persisting. He is always excited, always on fire, so to speak. Mitsuri is clearly love as a positive value that people should have. She is there in love with almost everyone, admiring everyone, and this ends up being a positive value as well. Once that this is something that gives her all of the strengths and powers that she has. And so it goes. Gyomei is meditation and calm, always waiting for the right moment to attack. exactly like the determination of the samurais, but also the determination of the mind that Buddha himself preached, as the Dharmapada, one of the greatest Buddhist scriptures, shows. Uzui is extravagance, or perhaps loyalty. Zenitsu is courage, or the overcoming of fears through it. Inosuke is the animalistic instinct that exists within us and that gives us power. Something that Nietzsche also promotes a lot, for example, when he talks about the beast within. And also how many of us in current civilization have lost this part and therefore end up in nihilism because of that. The villains at the same time are also showing the same thing. Muzan is clearly the cliché of control and obsession. He is the villain who always has everything and wants everything, and shows how this is actually a very negative value to have. And this is a cool thing, because while the positive values or the heroes embody what perhaps you and I should have and value in our lives or in people around us, as the characters themselves do, the villains, on the other hand, will be these negative values that would be not so good to have, or that we should really get rid or cut out of our heads, as the heroes themselves tend to do with them. Then you have the representation of lust, of temptations, especially sexual ones, through the Oiran woman Daki, who is a real hottie, by the way. You have narcissism and presumption by Gyoko, who is always thinking that he's better and superior to others through art, something very common to see in artists and famous people in particular. You have Doma as well, who is the embodiment of cynicism and even postmodernism even, always relativizing everything and living in a complete lack of values. You have Hatengo, with victimization and self-pity, but which is just a disguise for excessive anger, resentment, and spite. And this is why he always lives in the shadow. Actually, all of the demons do. And then when he reveals his true form, he is always this tiny thing. And of course, all of these negative values, they are, for most of the part, things that we tend to hide even from ourselves, which is something represented by the fact that most of the demons never can go out in the light. Because if you express yourself, or if you admit these negative feelings and values that you have or that you should not have, then they disappear once you get this consciousness of that. In analytical psychology, consciousness is also very related to the concept of the sun, which could be a very good and interesting relation in here. Now, of course, I would not be able to do an analysis of each one of those characters in a single video. I would probably need one video for each of those characters. Maybe I do one for Rengoku, or maybe Akaza, who knows. It depends on how well this video will be received. But to sum it all up, I would say that this is a secret message behind Demon Slayer. Everyone here represents something, whether a positive value that we should have, like in the heroes, or a negative value that we should avoid having, or at least put it into the sun as seen through the villains. And that's it. That's my Demon Slayer video. If you have any recommendations of another anime or even character to make an analysis of, you can write down in the comments, and goodbye.